Well, hello there. Yes, new glasses. New glasses goofing. Who let me come in here like this? Who allowed this? I look like a hot librarian. Nobody allowed it. I don't need permission. But are we serious with this? Oh my god. Anyway, today will be a glasses wearing video because I have a lot of stuff to read off of my computer because we are talking about some of the biggest flops in horror movie history. Some of them technically are not flops, but they were critically panned or otherwise did not perform as expected. Most of them do not survive by that reputation anymore, but I still thought that it would be fun to share my top 10 with you. I feel like I've been kind of facing the wrong way the whole time. Hello. Open body language. But if we haven't met before, hi, I'm Kylie, also known as Haunted Hippie, and I am a hot librarian in a way. I curate physical media, but that's my second channel. On this channel, we talk about horror movies. So if you love horror movies, if you love deep dives, if you love reviews, if you like top 10 lists like this, and you love watching people cosplay as Satan's favorite daughter, then literally look no further. Click the subscribe button, join my cult. Also click the like button and the notification bell, that way you never miss the next video. Now that you've joined us in my little hell, I say that we get started. I do have a couple honorable mentions, starting with my number 12 pick, which is The Blob from 1988. This one really shocked me, but it had a budget of around $10 million and only grossed $8.2 million. And what I'm gonna do for every movie on this list, I'm gonna share the budget and box office info, and then I did find one or two articles per movie from the time period. So for The Blob, this article is from 1988, August 5th of 1988, and we see what the people of the time were saying. We see how that lines up with the box office performance and then also how the movie has performed since then. Janet Maslin had this to say: "The Blob itself is the most impressive cast member, a genuinely clever creation that's at least as versatile as it is disgusting. Modern technology has yielded at least one definitive advance in the last 30 years, a better Blob. Whereas the original 1958 model, a rolling heap of silicone, did little more than wobble and eat, the updated Blob is infinitely more advanced." Yet for reasons having nothing to do with merit, the 1958 film earned a place in history. The remake, enterprising as it is, won't do the same. Now, The Blob from 1988 is still not rated super highly, but I think that most horror fans can definitely dig it. And I'm gonna use a lot of anecdotal evidence for this because I've been doing horror YouTube for the last 5 years. I've gotten many thousands of comments in that time, so this is just me speaking from that experience. Most gorehounds will always cite this as one of their favorites from the 80s. It's so funny to see a critic saying something like it's not gonna earn its place in history, because it totally has, and I think that its reputation has far surpassed the original movie from the 50s. Like, yes, the movie from the 50s has Steve McQueen, but there's just not a lot going on in that movie. Like, I don't ever see people really talking about that one, but the remake, it gets a lot more love. Oh, history. Oh, the tides of change. And I like The Blob. I really only watch it for the practical effects. I don't think it's like one of those underrated masterpieces that it's unbelievable that it underperformed. It is kind of weird because at that time, gore was super heavy in movies. I mean, this was the late 80s. It's not like it was the early 80s. Gore was king, but also so were franchises, and so maybe independent horror was not doing as well as something like Friday the 13th and Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. The next one that also didn't quite crack the top 10 is Event Horizon. This one is also not that surprising to me because the movie is so strange. After disappearing for 7 years, revolutionary spaceship Event Horizon is rediscovered. The team of scientists sent to investigate find that the entire crew is dead and a terrifying malevolent presence is lurking on board. This movie is nuts. I am not surprised that this underperformed. I think if it were released today, it would still underperform, but I'm so glad that something like it exists because, like, you know, the real freaks out there, this is nourishment. It released in August of 1997. It had a budget of $60 million and only grossed $42 million internationally. So that one did not even break even. It fell about $20 million short. And with the figures that are listed on like Wikipedia and Google, I'm not sure if these even include the marketing budget, so that's a whole other thing to factor in. But I found a review from the classic film critic Roger Ebert. He released a review the day that this movie released in 1997. He said, "I love movies like this. I got up and moved closer to the screen, volunteering to be drawn in. I appreciate the anachronistic details. I liked all of that stuff, but there wasn't much substance beneath it." And he only gave the movie 2 out of 4 stars, so a 50% rating. This one, again, much like The Blob, is not super highly rated because this one is a very subjective piece. But obviously it was an honorable mention, so I do recommend it. It is totally worth trying. And I feel like a movie that you need to watch before you die, just because of its originality. There seldom comes a movie this insane anymore, you know? So definitely check out Event Horizon if you've never seen it. Especially if you're a Sam Neill fan, a Jurassic Park fan. Event Horizon came out only 4 years after Jurassic Park. Can you imagine? Anyway, we gotta move on to the actual top 10, and kicking that off, we have A Cure for Wellness in the last spot. A Wall Street stockbroker travels to a remote location in the Swiss Alps to retrieve his company's CEO from an idyllic but mysterious wellness center. He soon suspects that the miraculous treatments are not what they seem. This movie is directed by, oh Captain my Captain, Gore Verbinski, who also directed The Ring and the first 3 movies of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Not only did this man make one of the best horror movies of all time, but also 3 of the best blockbusters ever made. Now, A Cure for Wellness, let's not get excited, okay? The quality is not there from the other 4 movies I've mentioned. It had a worldwide total of $26.5 million against a production budget of $40 million. This one was a certified flop. And I get it. This one is gonna be way too much for a lot of people to digest. It's too much for me. But you know what I'm a sucker for? Visuals. And also Mia Goth. This was back in 2016. Nobody really knew who she was yet. She has a haunting performance in this movie. Also, Gore Verbinski teamed up with Bojan Bazelli. Sorry if I'm butchering that, but it is the same cinematographer that he had on The Ring. So it's stunning. Like, it's a stunning movie, and I know that that is not enough to fully carry a film, but for me it is a reason to watch it, and I do enjoy the movie. The third act and the climax is vile. Like, it's vile, then like it's not good. Like, it's also not good, but you know, as a work of art, as something perhaps thought-provoking, even if quite predictable, there's so much visual food, like there's just so much to visually engage with. I do thoroughly enjoy the movie. It has been a couple years since I've rewatched it, so I might eat those words, but at the moment I would say that I do recommend A Cure for Wellness. Now, back in 2017, when it came out and flopped, the critics were saying things like, there's a certain pleasure to be had from an expensive misfire. That's the best that can be said for Gore Verbinski's arcly, gothic psychodrama A Cure for Wellness. Archly? I don't know that word, Fianoala. All the surreal images become nothing more than awe-inspiring affectations that don't add any meaning to the story itself. And like I said, most gratifying throughout the film is the anticipation of where Gore Verbinski will put his camera next. I'm telling you, like, it is gorgeous. So especially if you're into the technical side of things, this movie, oh, it's a strong achievement there. But because of that absolutely diabolical ending, yeah, it's at number 10. At number 9, I have a shocking title, which is Crimson Peak. And again, I don't know the marketing details. I don't know if this was a technical flop, but it was considered to have underperformed. After marrying the charming and seductive Sir Thomas Sharp, young Edith finds herself swept away to his remote Gothic mansion in the English hills. Also living there is Lady Lucille, Thomas's alluring sister and protector of her family's dark secrets. If you couldn't tell, maybe there's a little bit of a theme here, but oh, I love a Gothic film. This is a film by Guillermo del Toro. It had a production budget of $55 million and it grossed $74.7 million worldwide. Surprisingly, it outperformed in other territories. It only grossed $31.1 million in North America and then $43.6 million in other territories. And again, it's a very similar case to A Cure for Wellness, where the word of mouth might have been a little bit rocky, because even though it is such a gorgeous and competently made film by a wonderful team, wonderful actors, there is such an unsavory plot development in this film that is going to be such a turnoff for so many people, and I understand that, but I feel like upon a rewatch especially, knowing those shocking elements and stuff, it makes it more digestible the second time around. So, you know, maybe you saw A Cure for Wellness when it came out and you were like, ugh, maybe it's time to give it another go. You know what's gonna happen now, so maybe you'll be able to appreciate more things about the movie. When Crimson Peak came out, I actually found a review on the Princeton University premier publication for speculative fiction. The film is a love letter of sorts to all things Victorian Gothic with stunning costumes. Are you listening, Academy Awards? So I was like, okay, ooh, like a positive start. But then they conclude by saying a little more subtlety in scripting or an extra plot twist or two could have gone a long way towards creating a satisfying conclusion. I found myself expecting a level of storytelling revelation slightly beyond what the movie ultimately delivered. And I think that's fair, but once again, you know, I am a very visual girly. This also features the creature acting of Javier Botet, who I admire very much. I feel like for the most part now, Crimson Peak is a very, very well-liked film. A Cure for Wellness, maybe not so much, so, you know, that's why I'm getting in the ring for it a little bit. Crimson Peak, I think now is generally quite accepted, because also, you know, Del Toro, who doesn't love the guy? Next up, we have Dr. Sleep. Now, yet again, this one is not a technical flop, although I do speculate that it maybe broke even because the marketing budget for the sequel to The Shining, I remember it being all over the place. This was only in 2019, you know, this was only 5 years ago. So they had really high expectations for this one, right? It had a budget of $45 million and then worldwide only made about 72 million. I remember being really surprised about that at the time because I saw the movie in theaters and I was expecting it to pop off, especially because it was that same year that It Chapter 2 was coming out. You know, the work of Stephen King had been introduced to my generation that was just coming out of high school. So it was really, really weird. It had its run from November 8th of 2019 to January 9th of 2020. So this is pre-pandemic, you know, the theaters were in full swing. Really strange, but from what I could see, it was generally positively received at the time. On the Roger Ebert website, there was a critic named Brian Tallarico. He reviewed it. He gave it 3 out of 4 stars, so I mean, pretty good. While one can sometimes feel Flanagan struggling to satisfy both King and Kubrick's fans when he really should be trusting his own vision, he's talented enough to pull off this difficult blend of legacies. He twists King's sequel into something that's less about empowerment and more about overcoming trauma, reclaiming the darkest moments of your life. He makes major changes to the source material and comes out illustrating again what a confident, interesting filmmaker he can be. Kind of like someone else did 4 decades ago. And maybe Brian wasn't like super ahead of his time because I think it was the year prior in 2018 that The Haunting of Hill House came out. So by then, you know, I think everyone knew Mike Flanagan. That was one of Netflix's most popular shows to date. But at that time, I don't think that Mike Flanagan had really solidified himself as a director with theatrical releases that really hit. I love Oculus, and I do like his, I think it was like a prequel, sequel, Ouija Origin of Evil. I did like that one, and then a lot of his other stuff went to streaming. Now I'm really excited for a Mike Flanagan return to theatrical releases. I love his shows, of course, but I'm ready for him to be making movies again, you know? I would say that he is definitively the king of horror of this generation. It was James Wan in the 2010s, but he's kind of veered off. James Wan has done more action. Mike Flanagan really remains within the genre, and yeah, he does blend a lot of drama for sure, but he's kind of the guy right now, you know? So Dr. Sleep definitely has been retroactively appreciated a lot more. I don't think as much as it should be. There also is a wonderful director's cut, but I have covered this in the past when I did a deep dive of his career, that Stephen King reminded him that The Shining also didn't do that well when it first came out, and then it was later appreciated, and he feels like the same thing will happen for Dr. Sleep, and it is kind of happening. I put Dr. Sleep at number 8 though because I personally just kind of have some mixed feelings about it. I think that both the theatrical and director's cut have their pros and cons, and I feel that both cuts are of similar quality. Not a favorite, but I do love the kind of Mike Flanagan tone that always seeps into his work, so I do have a soft spot for it. Now, at number 7, we have The Lodge. This one was a true flop, and it's kind of hard for me to figure out why, looking back in retrospect. I talked about this one very recently. It's from the same filmmakers as Goodnight Mommy, and I think that they are a wonderful duo. I think The Lodge is a great film, but it had a budget of $18 million, and then it only grossed $3.16 million at the worldwide box office. Why that is, I don't know, because this was released in early 2020, I believe, and it starred Jaden Martell, who was huge at the time because, again, the year prior, It Chapter 2 had just come out, so a lot of people have been following the cast of the It films. It also stars Riley Keough, legendary, very talented Nepo baby, granddaughter of Elvis Presley, etc., etc., and I found generally positive reviews. On The Guardian, it got 4 out of 5 stars, and he made comparisons to Hereditary, but made sure to point out that The Lodge did not rip off that film because it was in pre-production before Hereditary ever came out, and while comparisons could in theory do more harm than good, for me they worked in its favor because while Hereditary's lurch from effective airless family drama to hokey horror dulled its impact, The Lodge's tighter consistency marks it out as the finer of the pair in many ways. A film that manages to burrow its way under your skin and stay there right through to the horrifying end. That is really high praise, right? Because the sweeping consensus and energy around Hereditary was that it was like, wow, modern masterpiece. And I don't know if I can second this. I think that I prefer Hereditary to The Lodge, but I think they are of similar quality, and if you loved Hereditary, then I think you might really like The Lodge. And try to go in blind. It's best to know as little as possible about it before you go in. At number 6, a movie that I truly will never forgive you all for letting flop is Renfield. This one came out just last year, so yeah, maybe am I being a little bit presumptuous, maybe, but I'm calling that this will be looked back upon as a classic. I just don't understand what's not to love. You have Nicolas Cage starring as Dracula. Like, this is the very natural follow-up to Vampire's Kiss from like 35 years ago. He is so wonderfully weird. This movie is so funny. It's so over-the-top gory. I loved Renfield. Like, it had a budget of $65 million and it only made 26.9 million. Like, truly, how dare you? If you want to go out and see this movie, then I'm not speaking to you, okay? You did your civic duty, right? Everyone else, just like, give me a minute, I will forgive you. But maybe I'm on an island a little bit. I understand that the reviews were not great. Like, most people thought this movie was only okay, but it just happened to be very much my cup of tea. Again, on the Roger Ebert website, Christy Lemire gave it 2.5 out of 4 stars, and the mundane humanization of these otherworldly figures calls to mind the deadpan humor of What We Do in the Shadows. But the material meant to beef up this story is so bland and underdeveloped, it makes Renfield feel like a sketch concept stretched thin to feature length. With this cast and this concept, there's a ton of potential here. The knowing meta-exploration of Dracula lore is often quite clever, and Renfield can be extremely entertaining in sporadic bursts, but examining it in the sun's harsh light causes it to shrivel to dust. You know what? I disagree. Sometimes it doesn't have to be that deep. Sometimes we can just have a little bit of fun. And I don't doubt that Christy Lemire, you know, likes to have their good fun too. But really, Renfield is a very specific brand of comedy, so I do kind of get it, but I still don't understand why it flopped. Like, Nicolas Cage, maybe it's just me, but to me, he's someone that could easily, like, sell out the theater. To me, he's someone that gets my butt in the seat, you know? I'm always curious what he's gonna do next, and he is not phoning it in here. It seems like he's having a blast, him and everyone else. And I love Nicholas Hoult, Awkwafina, you know, she's there. But God, if you missed Renfield, you should try it. You should try it. Now, my number 5, I love this movie so much, it's so stupid. I've talked about it quite a lot this year, and that is Night of the Creeps. This movie had a budget of $5 million, God bless them, and it only made about $500,000 in the box office. Like, what actually is the meaning of that? This movie stars Tom Atkins, who was a bona fide horror darling at that time, but I think that, again, it's like I said, in the 80s, that's when franchises first were truly a thing, and especially in the horror genre. So I can understand why something much smaller and unknown would underperform, but to make only, well, okay, almost $600,000, that's crazy to me, especially because this movie is so good. I'm like, how was the word of mouth not just on fire? The reviews, I guess, were only okay. Like, I don't know if audiences just weren't ready for something that absurd, this particular kind of irreverent dark comedy, because movies like Killer Clowns from Outer Space that came out a couple years later, it did fairly well, and I feel like the type of comedy is quite similar. But beyond its obviously derivative inspiration, the film shows a fair ability to create suspense, build tension, and achieve respectable performances. When the action becomes silly, which it does now and then, as when a bunch of obnoxious fraternity boys actually become rampaging zombies, Mr. Decker is adept at saving his film from total absurdity by a dash of humor. Like, the reviews were decent. They were. So I am kind of making it my personal mission to make sure that everybody knows about Night of the Creeps. I won't stop until it is considered a true classic. Now, at number 4, already referenced today actually, is, of course, The Shining. Couldn't make this list without The Shining. And the way that this movie is spoken about, I would have thought that it, like, actually truly flopped. But looking into it a little bit more, that wasn't totally the case. And I do eventually plan on doing an extreme deep dive on The Shining, so you'll get more information from me at some point. But with a budget of $19 million, it went on to gross $47.3 million. So I do think they made a little bit of money, but it far underperformed what Kubrick himself thought that it was gonna make. There's a great article from May 31st of 1980 in the Washington Post. It features a lot of quotes from Stanley Kubrick, so I definitely recommend giving it a read. The Shining is Kubrick's attempt to get back into the mainstream of American commercial cinema. It is not an artistic compromise for him, but it doesn't represent growth either for him or his audience. The film's technical expertise is all the more remarkable considering that 98% of it was shot on a soundstage at Elstree Studios in England. The appearance of being in a Hugh hotel in the mountains with scenic vistas out every window is a masterful illusion. And here's where we kind of get into Kubrick's intentions. The Shining is being marketed in a strikingly different manner from any of Kubrick's other films. This time he wants a big return and he wants it fast. So with some of his films prior, they would release in major cities like LA and New York, and they would kind of feel out the audience then, and then based on that, they would release it in more theaters and give it a wider release, which is something they still do today, actually. Because The Shining was, I think, Stephen King's most successful book to that date, I think he had much higher expectations for the box office, because if you look at 2001: A Space Odyssey, for example, that came out in 1968, and that had a budget of $12 million, and then worldwide, it made almost $67 million. million. So with The Space Odyssey, they quadrupled the investment, whereas with The Shining, they made about double, and they had spent more on production. I will wait until I do more of a full deep dive to get into the nitty gritty of the reception and everything, so stay posted for that. The Shining had to be in my top 5 because I love The Shining. I mean, who doesn't? Same thing for my number 3, Jennifer's Body. This had a budget of $16 million, and it did about double that at $31.6 million in the box office. But now I'm gonna point you to an existing deep dive of Jennifer's Body that I released earlier this year. That was a really fun one because I got into the nitty gritty of their test screenings, then I got into the critical and audience reception at the time, and then I also found some retrospective interviews that involved Megan Fox and Cody Diablo, Jennifer Kent, not Jennifer Kent, oh my god, other iconic woman director, Karyn Kusama, excuse me, but I unpacked how the three of them feel about the movie sort of being reclaimed by all the girlies. It was a great deep dive, it was a lot of fun, so check that one out, and we can get a lot more into this. I love Jennifer's Body. I mean, obviously, look, I'm wearing her today, so she had to be in my top 3, but my top 2 are the only 2 movies on this list that I give a perfect 5-star rating to, and that may change, you know, with rewatches of these other films. Things are always very fluid for me, but at my number 2 spot, I have Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch. I just very recently, a couple of weeks ago, released an intensive deep dive on that film. It's about 35 minutes long just for that one movie, so if you're a big fan of the Halloween franchise, then definitely check that one out. This one had a budget of $4.6 million, and it went on to make $14.4 million, so I do think they made some of their money back on it, but because the audience reception was so negative, it has taken so long for that movie to be seen as a classic and to be seen as the high quality film that it is. I love Halloween 3, I adore it, but I've so recently talked your ear off about it. To this day, there are still some naysayers, but again, anecdotally from my comment section, people love Halloween 3. It really has been reclaimed, and I get into all of that and fan art and reunion panels and all of that in the deep dive. At my number 1, I feel like a lot of you could have already seen this one coming, but I have John Carpenter's The Thing. Oh baby, was this movie misunderstood. Wow. And my god, has it been reclaimed. The Thing had a budget of $15 million, and it went on to gross only $20.6 million worldwide, which if you've seen the movie, if you've seen the Letterboxd reviews now, I think it sits at like a 4.1 or something crazy. That just seems ridiculous because it is a clear consensus these days. But from the legend himself, Roger Ebert, in 1982, he gave this movie 2.5 out of 4 stars. The Thing is a great barf bag movie, alright, but is it any good? I found it disappointing for 2 reasons: the superficial characterizations and the implausible behavior of the scientists on that icy outpost. Characters have never been Carpenter's strong point. He says he likes his movies to create emotions in his audiences, and I guess he'd rather see us jump 6 inches than get involved in the personalities of his characters. The thing that's crazy about that is I guess I can kind of agree with it, but the thing about Carpenter's characters, I'm thinking about Halloween, I'm thinking about The Fog. Yeah, we don't get a lot of like establishing dialogue. We don't often get a lot of lore about them, but we are just very much dropped into their lives. Like, Carpenter's characters feel very real to me. I'm thinking of Jamie Lee Curtis's characters, you know, in both Halloween and The Fog. Well, in Halloween, no, they do actually quite a bit to establish that, oh, you know, Laurie's a little shy, she's a little more focused on her books, she's shy to ask out boys, but his movies just feel very lived in to me. I feel like this is a bit of a conflation with like having tropey characters. Carpenter's movies don't often have the traditional archetypes, you know? And that's what I really enjoy about them. Like, his characters just feel real. The Thing is basically then just a geek show, a gross out movie in which teenagers can dare one another to watch the screen. There's nothing wrong with that. I like being scared, and I was scared by many scenes in The Thing, but it seems clear that Carpenter made his choice early on to concentrate on the special effects and the technology and to allow the story and people to become secondary, which I completely disagree. I think The Thing is completely, it's drenched in its character relationships. Obviously, this has been unpacked many hundreds, maybe thousands of times at this point, but the movie is all about paranoia, and that can't be exhibited unless we get a really strong feeling for these characters' relationships, which we do, just based on sort of the level of trust between them and how they engage with one another when they're frightened and being suspicious of one another. I found another review in the New York Times from June 25th of 1982 by Vincent Canby. John Carpenter's The Thing is a foolish, depressing, overproduced movie that mixes horror with science fiction to make something that is fun as neither one or the other. The Thing, which opens today at the Rivoli and other theaters, is too phony looking to be disgusting. It qualifies only as instant junk. That one was crazy. That one was really harsh. At least Ebert is like, I can understand how this is fun as a gross out movie. It makes me understand Carpenter so much better because people make fun of him as being like a grumpy bastard or like very cynical. And would having dozens of reviews like this not make you pretty resentful, especially when you know that you made an excellent film? Now it's been reclaimed, you know, it's seen as one of the best horror movies of all time, but Carpenter says like, well, you know, how does that help me now? Would have been great if you guys got it back then, which I understand, because after scrolling through some of these terrible reviews, they're very harsh. But that's why I had to put it at my number one, because just the level of vitriol versus the actual quality and reclamation of the film is insane. So maybe my top picks are a little bit basic, but you let me know. What are your thoughts? What are your top 10 or even your top 5 or top 3 horror box office flops that you love or have been more widely accepted now? And also let me know what other kind of top 10 lists you would like to see. Like I've already mentioned, there is a lot of other fun content on this channel, especially if you love deep dives, if you love reviews of new horror movies, check those out. Also, if you love physical media, check out my second channel. I also post other spooky content over there, travel vlogs, and I have a Patreon where you get weekly bonus reviews, you get podcasts with my dad, you get updates on my film career, you get a lot of behind the scenes stuff there. So if you're interested in movie making, if you need advice, if you're starting out in the industry, there's a lot of good stuff like that over on the Patreon. And we love them because they keep this channel afloat year round. A channel like mine doesn't do too well in the off season, so they really do keep me afloat. You can also find me on all the social medias, you know, go nuts, have fun, go find me. But more than anything, I just hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye.